Working on it. Working on it. Live on YouTube. Waiting for Facebook. Come on, Facebook. You can do it. You can do it, Facebook. I know you can. It's time for stories. It's story time. You have to start the live video. I mean, don't you? It was scheduled for now. Who was that? Oh, it's a group. Well, Facebook is bound to get started soon. I see I already have 2 viewers on YouTube. That was rather quick. I mean, I'd love to have more than 2, but in the meantime, 2 will do. And yes, Facebook is now live as well. We have Facebook and YouTube. We have Facebook and YouTube live with story time. That's right. It's time once again for a story. Tonight, we continue Holes. This will be part 2, starting on page 11 or so, somewhere around there. And then tomorrow night, we will pick back up with Dracula. Then Monday, Wednesday, Friday, it will be Dracula. And Tuesdays and Thursdays, it will be Holes, because Holes is a lot shorter and doesn't require nearly as much time to finish as Dracula does. As it is on 3 days a week with 1 chapter each time, Dracula will take like 9 weeks to finish. That's incredible, right? Well, with hope, by the time we finish Dracula, we won't be in this dumb quarantine anymore. And I don't mean that as in like, oh, it's so dumb. I mean, like, I hope we're through with this crap about the corona. I'm so tired of corona. But some good things have come of it, so there's that. I am quite a fan of story time. I enjoy reading stories for you all. And you know what? If you enjoy the stories as well, please like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow the Storytime Facebook group. Join the Facebook group so you can get notified when I do the Facebook Lives as well. Or, well, actually, I love it if you watched on YouTube. But regardless, yes, get notifications when that happens. Share it with your friends so they can be a part of it as well. And we will all have a jolly good time. Are you ready for another enticing evening of stories, of dramatic readings? Because I know I am. So, right tonight I'm just drinking water. I'm just thirsty is all. So, if I have to pause in the middle to go get a refill, forgive me, but I don't think I'll have to do that. I'm just parched is all. I'm starting to drink more water. Apparently, if you drink 10 plus glasses a day, you are happier. You are a happier person in general. At least one study suggested such things. I must admit, I was generally a lot more positive when I was drinking more water, so I think that's a practice I just need to get back into. My optimal was around a gallon a day, which sounds like a lot, and none at the same time. But it can be tough to drink a gallon a day, but you have to dedicate yourself, and that's something I should start doing again. It's just not like I have much else to do right now. Anyway, we are reading Holes, and I feel as though perhaps I should be nibbling on donut holes while I read this one. You know, just if we're going with the themed drinks, last night was blood. I mean, wine, and tonight, well, not a drink, but a themed snack could be donut holes. But you know what? I don't have any of those, and I'm not going to go buy them either. So regardless, if you'd like a shout out during story time or at the end, make sure you leave a comment. Well, in the live video, it's over here. Well, one of these sides, it might be down below for you. I'm not sure. Leave a comment if you like. Make sure you like as well the video and share it. If you're on YouTube, please also leave a comment if you'd like a shout out. I'd be happy to give you one. I love giving shout outs and telling all my friends how much I love and appreciate them. And anyone who's watching this is my friend. So, without further ado, let us get started with Holes Part 2. Are you ready? Because I am. It was still dark. The only light came from the moon and the stars, more stars than Stanley had ever seen before. It seemed he had only just gotten to sleep when Mr. Pendanski came in and woke everyone up. Using all his might, he brought the shovel back down on the dry lake bed. The force stung his hands, but made no impression on the earth. He wondered if he had a defective shovel. He glanced at Zero, about 15 feet away, who scooped out a shovelful of dirt and dumped it on a pile that was already almost a foot tall. For breakfast, they'd been served some kind of lukewarm cereal. The best part was the orange juice. They each got a pint carton. The cereal actually didn't taste too bad, but it had smelled just like his cot. Then they filled their canteens, got their shovels, and were marched out across the lake. Each group was assigned a different area. The shovels were kept in a shed near the showers. They all looked the same to Stanley, although X-Ray had his own special shovel, which no one else was allowed to use. X-Ray claimed it was shorter than the others, but if it was only by a fraction of an inch. The shovels were 5 feet long, from the tip to the steel blade to the end of the wooden shaft. Stanley's hole would have to be as deep as his shovel, and he'd have to be able to lay the shovel flat across the bottom in any direction. That was why X-Ray wanted the shortest shovel. The lake was so full of holes and mounds that it reminded Stanley of pictures he'd seen of the moon. If you find anything interesting or unusual, Mr. Pendanski had told him, you should report it either to me or Mr. Sir when we come around with the water truck. If the warden likes what you found, you'll get the rest of the day off. What are we supposed to be looking for? Stanley asked him. You're not looking for anything. You're digging to build character. It's just if you find anything the warden would like to know about it. He glanced helplessly at his shovel. It wasn't defective. He was defective. Excuse me, that was a burp. A delicious burp. Don't know why I said that, but I said it anyway. Hello, Mum, I see you have joined. Hello, Heather, and hello, Heather again. Good comment there, Heather. I appreciate that one. All right, back to it. The shovel sank a few inches into the packed earth. He smiled. For once in his life, it paid to be overweight. Oh, I skipped a sentence, yeah? Stupid bar thing at the top. He noticed a thin crack in the ground. He placed the point of his shovel on top of it. Then he jumped on the back of the blade with both feet. The shovel sank a few inches into the packed earth. He smiled. For once in his life, it paid to be overweight. He leaned on the shaft and pried up his first shovelful of dirt, then dumped it off the side. Only 10 million more to go, he thought, then placed the shovel back in the crack and jumped on it again. He unearthed several shovelfuls of dirt in this manner before it occurred to him that he was dumping his dirt within the perimeter of his hole. He laid his shovel flat on the ground and marked where the edges of his hole would be. 5 feet was awfully wide. He moved the dirt he'd already dug up out past his mark. He took a drink from his canteen. 5 feet would be awfully deep, too. The digging got easier after a while. The ground was hardest at the surface, where the sun had baked a crust about 8 inches deep. Beneath that, the earth was looser. By the time Stanley broke past the crust, a blister had formed in the middle of his right thumb, and it hurt to hold the shovel. You doing okay, Riley? Oh, yes, she just jumped onto a chair. Stanley's great-great-grandfather was named Elia Yelnats. He was born in Latvia, where he was when he was 15 years old, he fell in love with Myra Menke. He didn't know he was Stanley's great-grandfather. Myra Menke was 14. She would turn 15 in 2 months, at which time her father had decided she should be married. Elia went to her father to ask for her hand, but so did Igor Barkov, the pig farmer. Igor was 57 years old. He had a red nose and fat, puffy cheeks. I will trade you my fattest pig for your daughter, Igor offered. And what have you got? Myra's father asked Elia. A heart full of love, said Elia. I'd rather have a fat pig, said Myra's father. Desperate, Elia went to see Madame Zeroni, an old Egyptian woman who lived on the edge of town. He had become friends with her, though she was quite a bit older than him. She was even older than Igor Barkov. The other boys of his village liked to mud wrestle. Elia preferred visiting Madame Zeroni and listening to her many, many stories. That was nice. Madame Zeroni had dark skin and a very wide mouth. When she looked at you, her eyes seemed to expand, and you felt like she was looking right through you. Elia, what's wrong? She asked, before he even told her he was upset. She was sitting in a homemade wheelchair. She had no left foot. Her leg stopped at her ankle. I'm in love with Myra Menke, Elia confessed, but Igor Barkov has offered to trade his fattest pig for her. I can't compete with that. Good, said Madame Zeroni. You're too young to get married. You've got your whole life ahead of you. But I love Myra. Myra's head is as empty as a flower pot. But she's beautiful. So is a flower pot. Can she push a plough? Can she milk a goat? No, she is too delicate. Can she? What in the world? Can she have an intellectual conversation? No, she is silly and foolish. Will she take care of you when you are sick? No, she is spoiled and will only want you to take care of her. So she's beautiful. So what? Tui! Madame Zeroni spat on the dirt. She told Elia that he should go to America. Like my son, that's where your fortune lies, not with Myra Menke. But Elia would hear none of that. He was 15, and all he could see was Myra's shallow beauty. Madame Zeroni hated to see Elia so forlorn. Against her better judgment, she agreed to help him. It just so happens my sow gave birth to a litter of piglets yesterday, she said. There is one little runt whom she won't suckle. You may have him. He would die anyway. Madame Zeroni led Elia around the back of her house where she kept her pigs. Elia took the tiny piglet, but he didn't see what good it would do him. It wasn't much bigger than a rat. He'll grow, Madame Zeroni assured him. Do you see that mountain on the edge of the forest? Yes, said Elia. On the top of the mountain there is a stream where the water runs uphill. You must carry the piglet every day to the top of the mountain and let it drink from the stream. As it drinks, you are to sing to him. She taught Elia a special song to sing to the pig. On the day of Myra's 15th birth, you should carry the pig up the mountain for the last time, then take it directly to Myra's father. It will be fatter than any of Igor's pigs. If it is that big and fat, said Elia, how will I be able to carry it up the mountain? The piglet is not too heavy for you now, is it? Said Madame Zeroni. Of course not, said Elia. Do you think it will be too heavy for you tomorrow? No. Every day you will carry the pig up the mountain. It will get a little bigger, but you will get a little stronger. After you give the pig to Myra's father, I want you to do one more thing for me. Anything, said Elia. I want you to carry me up to the mountain. I want to drink from the stream, and I want you to sing the song to me. Elia promised he would. Madame Zeroni warned that if he failed to do this, he and his descendants would be doomed for all eternity. At the time, Elia thought nothing of the curse. He was just a 15-year-old kid, and eternity didn't seem much longer than a week from Tuesday. Besides, he liked Madame Zeroni and would be glad to carry her up the mountain. He would have done it right then and there, but he wasn't yet strong enough. Stanley was still digging. His hole was about 3 feet deep, but only in the center. It sloped upward to the edges. The sun had only just come up over the horizon, but he could already feel its hot rays against his face. As he reached down to pick up his canteen, he felt a sudden rush of dizziness and put his hands on his knees to steady himself. For a moment he was afraid he would throw up, but the moment passed. He drank the last drop of water from his canteen. He had blisters on every one of his fingers, and one in the center of each palm. Everyone else's hole was a lot deeper than his. He couldn't actually see their holes, but he could tell by the size of their dirt piles. He saw a cloud of dust moving across the wasteland and noticed that the other boys had stopped digging and were watching it too. The dirt cloud moved closer, and he could see that it trailed behind a red pickup truck. The truck stopped near where they were digging, and the boys lined up behind it. X-Ray in front, Zero at the rear. Stanley got in line behind Zero. Mr. Sir filled each of their canteens from a tank of water in the bed of the pickup. As he looked at Stanley's canteen, as he took Stanley's canteen from him, he said, "This isn't the Girl Scouts, is it?" Stanley raised and lowered one shoulder. Mr. Sir followed Stanley back to his hole to see how he was doing. "You better get with it," he said, "or else you're going to be digging in the hottest part of the day." He popped some sunflower seeds into his mouth, deftly removed the shells with his teeth, and spat them into Stanley's hole. Every day Elia carried the back to the Elia story. Every day Elia carried the little piglet up the mountain and sang to it as it drank from the stream. As the pig grew fatter, Elia grew stronger. On the day of Myra's 15th birthday, Elia's pig weighed over 50 stones. Madame Zeroni had told him to carry the pig up the mountain on that day as well, but Elia didn't want to present himself to Myra smelling like a pig. Instead, he took a bath. It was his second bath in less than a week. Then he led the pig to Myra's. Igor Barkov was there with his pig as well. These are two of the finest pigs I've ever seen, Myra's father declared. He was so impressed with Elia, who seemed to have grown bigger. Elia, who seemed to have grown bigger and stronger in the last 2 months. I used to think you were a good-for-nothing book reader, he said, but I see now you could be an excellent mud wrestler. May I marry your daughter? Elia boldly asked. First, I must weigh the pigs. Alas, poor Elia should have carried his pig up the mountain one last time. The two pigs weighed exactly the same. Stanley's blisters had ripped open back to Stanley, and new blisters formed. He kept changing his grip on the shovel to try to avoid the pain. Finally, he removed his cap and held it between the shaft of his shovel and his raw hands. This helped, but digging was harder because the cap would slip and slide. The sun beat down on his unprotected head and neck. Though he tried to convince himself otherwise, he'd been aware for a while that his piles of dirt were too close to his hole. The pile was outside his 5-foot circle, but he could see he was going to run out of room. Still, he pretended otherwise and kept adding more dirt to the piles that would eventually have to move. The problem was that when the dirt was in the ground, it was compacted. It expanded when it was excavated. The piles were a lot bigger than his hole was deep. It was either now or later. Reluctantly, he climbed up out of his hole and once again dug his shovel into his previously dug dirt. Back to Myra. Myra's father got down on his hands and knees and closely examined each pig, tail to snout. Those are two of the finest pigs I have ever seen, he said at last. How am I to decide? I have only one daughter. Why not let Myra decide? Suggested Elia. That's preposterous, exclaimed Igor, expelling saliva as he spoke. Myra is just an empty-headed girl, said her father. How can she possibly decide when I, her father, can't? She knows how she feels in her heart, said Elia. Myra's father rubbed his chin, then he laughed and said, Why not? He slapped Elia on the back. It doesn't matter to me. A pig is a pig. He summoned his daughter. Elia blushed when Myra entered the room. Good afternoon, Myra, he said. She looked at him. You're Elia, right? She asked. Myra, said her father. Elia and Igor have each offered a pig for your hand in marriage. It doesn't matter to me. A pig is a pig, so I will let you make the choice. Whom do you wish to marry? Myra looked confused. You want me to decide? That's right, my blossom, said her father. Gee, I don't know, said Myra. Which pig weighs more? They both weigh the same, said her father. Golly, said Myra. I guess I choose Elia. No, Igor. No, Elia. No, Igor. Oh, I know. I'll think of a number between 1 and 10. I'll marry whoever guesses the closest number. Okay, I'm ready. 10, guessed Igor. Elia said nothing. Elia, said Myra. What number do you guess? Elia didn't pick a number. Marry Igor, he said, he muttered. You can keep my pig as a wedding present. The next time the water truck came, it was driven by Mr. Pendanski. Back to Stanley, who also brought back sack lunches. Stanley sat with his back against a pile of dirt and ate. He had a bologna sandwich, potato chips, and a large chocolate chip cookie. How you doing? Said Magnet. Not real good, said Stanley. Well, the first hole's the hardest, Magnet said. Stanley took a long, deep breath. He couldn't afford to dawdle. He was way behind the others, and the sun just kept getting hotter. It wasn't even noon yet, but he didn't know if he had the strength to stand up. He thought about quitting. He wondered what they would do to him. What would they do to him? His clothes were soaked with sweat. In school, he had learned that sweating was good for you. It was nature's way of keeping you cool. So why was he so hot? Using his shovel for support, he managed to get to his feet. Where are we supposed to go to the bathroom? He asked Magnet. Magnet gestured with his arms to the great expanse around them. Pick a hole, any hole, he said. Stanley staggered across the lake, almost falling over a dirt pile. Behind him he heard Magnet say, But first make sure nothing's living in it. Back to Myra. After leaving Myra's house, Elia wandered aimlessly through the town, back to Elia, until he found himself down by the wharf. He sat on the edge of the pier and stared down into the cold black water. He could not understand how Myra had trouble deciding between him and Igor. He thought she loved him. Even if she didn't love him, couldn't she see what a foul person Igor was? It was like Madame Zeroni had said, her head was as empty as a flower pot. Some men were gathering on another dock, and he went to see what was going on. A sign read, "Deck hands wanted, free passage to America." He had no sailing experience, but the ship's captain signed him aboard. The captain could see that Elia was a man of great strength. Not everybody could carry a full-grown pig up the side of a mountain. It wasn't until the ship had cleared the harbor and was heading out across the Atlantic that he suddenly remembered his promise to carry Madame Zeroni up the mountain. He felt terrible. He wasn't afraid of the curse. He thought that was a lot of nonsense. He felt bad because he knew Madame Zeroni had wanted to drink from the stream before she died. Zero, back to the story, back to Stanley. Zero was the smallest kid in Group D, but he was the first one to finish digging. "You're finished?" Stanley asked enviously. Zero said nothing. Stanley walked to Zero's hole and watched him measure it with his shovel. The top of his hole was a perfect circle, and the sides were smooth and steep. Not one dirt clod more than necessary had been removed from the earth. Zero pulled himself up to the surface. He didn't even smile. He looked down at his perfectly dug hole, spat in it, then turned and headed back to the camp compound. "Zero's one weird dude," said Zigzag. Stanley would have laughed, but he didn't have the strength. Zigzag had to be the weirdest dude Stanley had ever seen. He had a long, skinny neck and a big round head with wild, frizzy blonde hair that stuck out in all directions. His head seemed to bob up and down on his neck like it was on a spring. Armpit was the second one to finish digging. He also spat in his hole before heading back to the camp compound. One by one, Stanley watched each of the boys spit into his hole and return to the camp compound. Stanley kept digging. His hole was almost up to his shoulders, although it was hard to tell exactly where ground level was because his dirt piles completely surrounded the hole. The deeper he got, the harder it was to raise the dirt up and out of the hole. Once again, he realized he was going to have to move the piles. His cap was stained with blood from his hands. He felt like he was digging his own grave. And back to Elia. In America, in America, Elia learned to speak English. He fell in love with a woman named Sarah Miller. She could push a plow, milk a goat, and most important, think for herself. She and Elia often stood up half the night talking and laughing together. Their life was not easy. Elia worked hard, but bad luck seemed to follow him everywhere. He always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He remembered Madame Zeroni telling him that she had a son in America. Elia was forever looking for him. He'd walk up to complete strangers and ask if they knew someone named Zeroni or had ever heard of anyone named Zeroni. No one did. Elia wasn't sure what he'd do if he ever found Madame Zeroni's son anyway. Carry him up a mountain and sing the pig lullaby to him? What? After his barn was struck by lightning for the third time, he told Sarah about his broken promise to Madame Zeroni. "I'm worse than a pig thief," he said. "You should leave me and find someone who isn't cursed." "I'm not leaving you," said Sarah, "but I want you to do one thing for me." "Anything," said Elia. Sarah smiled. "Sing me the pig lullaby." He sang it for her. Her eyes sparkled. "That's so pretty. What does it mean?" Elliot tried his best to translate it from Latvian into English, but it wasn't the same. "It rhymes in Latvian," he told her. "I could tell," said Sarah. A year later, their child was born. Sarah named him Stanley because she noticed that Stanley was yelled at spelled backwards. Sarah changed the words of the pig lullaby so that they rhymed, and every night she sang it to little Stanley. If only, the woodpecker sighs, the bark on the tree was as soft as the skies, while the wolf waits below, hungry and lonely, crying to the moon, if only, if only. Stanley's hole, back to Stanley, was as deep as his shovel, but not quite wide enough on the bottom. He grimaced as he sliced off a chunk of dirt, then raised it up and flung it onto a pile. He laid his shovel back down on the bottom of his hole, and, to his surprise, it fit. He rotated it and only had to chip off a few chunks of dirt here and there before it could lie flat across his hole in every direction. He heard the water truck approaching and felt a strange sense of pride at being able to show Mr. Sir or Mr. Pendanski that he had dug his first hole. He put his hands on the rim and tried to pull himself up. He couldn't do it. His arms were too weak to lift his heavy body. He used his legs to help, but he just didn't have any strength. He was trapped in his hole. It was almost funny, but he wasn't in the mood to laugh. Stanley, he heard Mr. Pendanski call. Using his shovel, he dug 2-foot holes in the hole wall. He climbed out to see Mr. Pendanski walking over to him. I was afraid you'd fainted, Mr. Pendanski said. You wouldn't have been the first. I'm finished, Stanley said, putting his blood-spotted cap back on his head. All right, said Mr. Pendanski, raising his hand for a high five, but Stanley ignored it. He didn't have the strength. Mr. Pendanski lowered his hand and looked down at Stanley's hole. Well done, he said. You want to ride back? Stanley shook his head. I'll walk. Mr. Pendanski climbed back into the truck without filling Stanley's canteen. Stanley waited for him to drive away, then took another look at his hole. He knew it was nothing to be proud of, but he felt proud nonetheless. He sucked up his last bit of saliva and spat. A lot of people don't believe in curses. A lot of people don't believe in yellow-spotted lizards either, but if one bites you, it doesn't make a difference whether you believe it or not. Actually, it is kind of odd that scientists named the lizard after its yellow spots. Each lizard has exactly 11 spots, 11 yellow spots, but the spots are hard to see on its yellow-green body. The lizard is from 6 to 10 inches long and has big red eyes. In truth, its eyes are yellow and it is the skin around the eyes which is red, but everyone always speaks of its red eyes. It also has black teeth and a milky white tongue. Looking at one, you would have thought that it should have been named a red-eyed lizard or a black-toothed lizard or perhaps a white-tongued lizard. If you've ever been close enough to see the yellow spots, you're probably dead. The yellow-spotted lizards like to live in holes, which offer shade from the sun and protection from predatory birds. Up to 20 lizards may live in one hole. They have strong, powerful legs and can leap out of very deep holes to attack their prey. They eat small animals, insects, certain cactus thorns, and the shells of sunflower seeds. Stanley stood in the shower and let the cold water pour over his hot body and sore body. His hot and sore body. Sorry for the redundancy there. It was 4 minutes of heaven. For the second day in a row, he didn't use soap. He was too tired. Looks like. Oh no, Riley is not still hiding. She's out there. Hello there, Emma. Glad to see you have joined. And I'm doing well. Yourself? Yo 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 to you too. All right. Do. There was no roof over the shower building, and the walls were raised up 6 inches off the ground, except in the corners. There was no drain in the floor. The water ran out under the walls and evaporated quickly in the sun. He put on his clean set of orange clothes. He returned to his tent, put his duty clothes in his crate, got out his pen and box of stationery, and headed to the rec room. A sign on the door said rec room. Nearly everything in the room was broken. The TV, the pinball machine, the furniture, even the people looked broken, with their worn-out bodies sprawled over the various chairs and sofas. X-Ray and Armpit were playing pool. The surface of the table reminded Stanley of the surface of the lake. It was full of bumps and holes because so many people had carved their initials into the felt. There was a hole in the far wall, and an electric fan had been placed in front of it. Cheap air conditioning. At least the fan worked. As Stanley made his way across the room, he tripped over an outstretched leg. Hey, watch it, said an orange lump on a chair. You watch it, muttered Stanley, too tired to care. What did you say? The lump demanded. Nothing, said Stanley. The lump rose. He was almost as big as Stanley and a lot tougher. You said something. He poked his fat finger in Stanley's neck. What did you say? A quick a crowd quickly formed around them. Be cool, said X-Ray. He put his hand on Stanley's shoulder. You don't want to mess with the caveman, he warned. The caveman's cool, said Armpit. I'm not looking for trouble, Stanley said. I'm just tired, that's all. The lump grunted. X-Ray and Armpit led Stanley over to a couch. Squid slid over to make room as Stanley sat down. Did you see the caveman back there? X-Ray asked. The caveman's one tough dude, said Squid, and he lightly punched Stanley's arm. Stanley leaned back against the torn vinyl upholstery. Despite his shower, his body still radiated heat. wasn't trying to start anything, he said. The last thing he wanted to do after killing himself all day on the lake was to get in a fight with the boy called the Caveman. He was glad X-Ray and Armpit had come to his rescue. Well, how do you like your first hole? Asked Squid. Stanley groaned and the other boys laughed. Well, the first hole's the hardest, said Stanley. No way, said X-Ray. The second hole's a lot harder. You're hurting before you even get started. If you think you're sore now, just wait and see how you feel tomorrow morning, right? That's right, said Squid. Plus, the fun's gone, said X-Ray. The fun? Asked Stanley. Don't lie to me, said X-Ray. I bet you always wanted to dig a big hole, right? Am I right? Stanley had never really thought about it before, but he knew better than to tell X-Ray he wasn't right. Every kid in the world wants to dig a great big hole, said X-Ray. To China, right? Right, said Stanley. See what I mean? Said X-Ray. That's what I'm saying. But now the fun's gone, and you still got to do it again and again and again. Camp Fun and Games, said Stanley. What's in the box? Asked Squid. Stanley had forgotten he'd brought it. Paper. I was going to write a letter to my mother. Your mother? Laughed Squid. She'll worry if I don't. Squid scowled. Stanley looked around the room. This was the one place in camp where the boys could enjoy themselves, and what did they do? They wrecked it. The glass on the TV was smashed, and as if someone had put his foot through it. Every table and chair seemed to be missing at least one leg. Everything leaned. He waited to write the letter until after Squid had gotten up and joined the game of pool. Dear Mom, today was my first day at camp, and I've already made some friends. We've we've been out on the lake all day, so I'm pretty tired. Once I pass the swimming test, I'll get to learn how to water ski. I. He stopped writing as he became aware that somebody was reading over his shoulder. He turned to see Zero standing behind the couch. I don't want her to worry about me, he explained. Zero said nothing. He just stared at the letter with a serious, almost angry look on his face. Stanley slipped it back into the stationery box. Did the shoes have red X's on the back? Zero asked him. It took Stanley a moment, but then he realized Zero was asking about Clyde Livingston's shoes. And that, dear readers, is where we will stop. That is 10 pages for the evening. We will pick this up on Tuesday. I hope you enjoyed tonight's reading of Holes. Good story. I do love the story. Yes, thank you, Carl. Glad you liked it. And glad all of you enjoyed yourselves. Glad to see people were here listening and watching. And if you would like to continue watching, if you enjoy this, please share the video with your friends as well on your page. That way more people can see this is happening. Please feel free to invite people to the group on Facebook as well. That's one great way for people to see it. Invite them to the Facebook group. That's something you can do for sure. If you do that, then they'll be able to see what's going on, and they'll be able to see the times I do this, and they'll be able to join as well. Like I said, we will now be doing, and yes, you are welcome. Hey, Shay, glad to see you. You're welcome as well. Where was I going? Oh, yes, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So tomorrow we will be continuing with Dracula. No. Today's Friday. No, today's Friday. So tomorrow we read Russian fairy tales. We move on to fairy tales tomorrow. Tomorrow and Sunday we read more of those wacky, insane Russian fairy tales. Then Monday, Wednesday, Friday we jump into Dracula, and Tuesday and Thursday we continue Holes. So until tomorrow, dear listeners, dear readers, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and all that jazz. Until then, I bid you adieu.